Hello, everyone. Let's talk about consciousness at birth and death and kind of how it progresses. So, there's some memories that I have from when I was very young, very young. I'm talking kindergarten and first grade. For some reason, I do have very, very crisp memories from a lot of these times. I even have a memory or a set of memories from being a baby. But what I find most interesting in retrospect, in remembering how my consciousness felt as a child, what I find most interesting is that I thought I didn't, I, back then, mentally, I thought that I didn't understand like other people did, like that I didn't quite get something that I thought that everyone else got, that I thought that everyone else just knew something that I didn't. Because I could clearly see that, you know, I've said this before, that other children were copying their parents, copying each other, kind of forming their personalities based on, what they saw in their environment. Um, and I couldn't quite figure out how to do it. Like, I could see it clearly. I could see that they were doing this. And I thought that I was dumb because I didn't understand how to do it. And then in retrospect, I realized that I was kind of seeing them put up these walls based on the walls that they saw in other people, funneling their consciousness through certain avenues along certain corridors within their mind, setting up walls in their mind so that their consciousness would flow in a similar way, confining it. And I didn't think of it as confining it back then, but I thought other people knew something that I didn't, that I wasn't quite getting it. But in retrospect, I understand now that I was seeing them set up these walls to funnel their consciousness in a certain way that would replicate how other people funneled their consciousness for themselves. What consciousness is, it it feels different than thought. The mind, the mind forms thoughts based on past impressions, based on memory, based on experiences. All of this memory kind of forms how we speak to ourselves, how we think, what we think about, what thoughts repeat in our heads, and kind of the carousel that moves around in a circle that is our mind. In a lot of understandings of meditation in various texts, it talks about the mind being very much like a carousel, where it's like it has these certain animals and it kind of just goes in a circle. And the more that you look at thought, the more that you realize it's based on impression. But consciousness is kind of the person that's riding this carousel. And it hops on different animals on the carousel as it's going around this circle. Or you can think of consciousness as the central pillar that the carousel revolves around. And the consciousness is just viewing it all. That might be more useful for this analogy. But how consciousness feels, I'm not an authority on this more so than you are. I just might have a different perspective based on my own impressions, my own memories. But for some reason, when I was young, it was very clear to me that they were, people were forming these impressions from other people. And I constantly wondered, should I do that? How do I do that? I couldn't figure out how to set up the same channels, how to funnel my consciousness in the way that other people were. I couldn't figure out how to copy the same walls, if that makes sense. Going back to when I was a baby, and I don't have like a lot of baby memories, but I do have one. I can place myself in that baby brain that I was. Despite, I think at this point, if I'm correct, all the cells in my body have been replaced. And that's another strange thing about the brain. Despite all the cells replacing themselves throughout our body, vast majority at least, not great on biology, but the vast majority at least have replaced themselves, but somehow these memories carry on. These impressions carry on. Muscle memory carries on. We age because this copying kind of degrades over time, the ability for the cells to copy. But I remember as a baby and how my consciousness felt, and it felt the same way. It's very odd because it's hard to describe. it's just hard to describe this as kind of clear water to somebody who has never experienced water. But I mean, we've all experienced consciousness. I think that we just have so many descriptions in our head, or we have different thoughts about it, or we've learned from other people that it's hard to really communicate what consciousness is, at least for me. But as a baby, I remember having the same, whatever this substance that is consciousness is, I remember it feeling the same way. It's just I didn't have any words in my head. I didn't have any words in my head because I didn't know any. Consciousness felt the same way. I wasn't aware of my lower body. I was much smaller. And, I remember my arms being very small and just kind of reaching from side to side, not being aware of my lower body, and kind of feeling that my existence was kind of in the breathing, sucking area, and not super aware of my head, but my consciousness was very there. That was its placement. I felt it there, but not being super aware beyond like this area right here. Not super aware of the top of my head, and definitely not aware of my lower body. Maybe that's why babies poop themselves or pee themselves, or they're not really aware of that system down there. But I remember, and I also remember that my ears must not have been very developed, or it always sounded a little bit like I was underwater. It feels like I couldn't distinguish sounds. It's very limiting and strange experience to have my consciousness within these limitations, and my eyes weren't fully formed yet, and I could only see the outline of things. But I remember my consciousness feeling the same way it does now, but within these limitations, and not thinking in words, but the consciousness felt the same. It's very strange, especially to remember it so crisply. I don't know if it's a schizophrenic thing or what, but the consciousness itself felt the same, despite it being in these limitations. And I think we place so much emphasis on our mind and what we think and our experiences and what we identify with and how we basically, though people don't understand this, but how we funnel our consciousness. I think that we're so identified with those things that we don't really think about consciousness. We don't try to grasp it. It's easier for somebody, who meditates or who has meditated quite a bit. I've kind of fallen off my practice, but I meditate from time to time. In my best weeks, I meditate every day. But a lot of meditation is just stripping down, taking away the carousel, and just having that central pillar of consciousness. Or, being on the carousel, but not hopping on different animals, different horses, different whatever, not riding these various things and taking up the thought forms of the carousel, but rather, just standing or moving about the carousel. Because we can move our consciousness within our heads, within our mind space when we're meditating. I remember when I first started meditating, being really frustrated that in meditation, I would try to use my consciousness in this void, in this space, to look at myself. I kept on trying to turn it to look at itself. And, I thought that this was just a really weird quirk, but I found other stuff in spiritual texts talking about how other people do the same thing where, a lot of us try to look at ourselves, but the consciousness itself is there, and we're not using eyes in the same way, and we expect to be able to see ourselves, but we are that which we are trying to look at. So we don't have that body identification. And that's why meditation is so useful. It makes you feel what you really are. And when we sync it up with breath and things like that, it makes it much easier, because when we align our body with our consciousness, or use our body to more crisply focus on our consciousness, then, we learn things, we feel things, we even know things that we wouldn't otherwise. But it's so strange how much we identify with, these various forms of boxes that we place within ourselves, within our brains. I don't know how I know this, and I didn't really, there's a lot of things that I just came upon in realization that I felt were really true, and I was very sure about, and I am sure about. But then, I also think that just because I'm sure doesn't mean I'm correct, because there's a whole lot of people that are sure about a lot of things, or at least say they are, think that they are, and they're incorrect. So, I'm always aware that my sureness does not necessarily equate to realization or truth. But one thing that I've always felt was, and then I've come upon in spiritual texts later, is that a lot of the reason that we're so frustrated or scared when we die is that our consciousness is so identified with the body. Our soul, which is very much connected to our consciousness. Though I don't know the words or the description to make them the same in my head, but the consciousness is so identified with the body that when we're dying, when our life is ending, when all the life force that we borrowed from the earth, all the materials that we borrowed from the earth, all of that is kind of collecting and ready to go out the proper gates, because a lot of the life force is not visible. That's what's that thing about 23 grams or 28 grams. When somebody dies, it's gone. Energy might have mass, and it might affect weight of a body. I'm not sure if it actually has weight itself. Like, does the soul or conscious have weight? I don't know if we could equate it to weight, but I think that we can equate it to mass, and how mass affects the body and perhaps creates a space bubble in a way and then just leaves. Just talking on my butt because I don't have the right words or descriptions for this. But when everything's being all gathered within us, and all the energy and and the consciousness, and everything kind of naturally knows how to go, just like a river. When water doesn't think to evaporate and then form clouds, pour down, go into a river, and the river goes back into the ocean, it just does. There's so much intelligence within our body that is innate, that is inherent, that's in our genetics, that we can't access mentally. Our body, our genetics, our systems are more intelligent than us in a way, even though we think of intelligence as being like, conscious, being able to figure out problems. There's so many problems that our energy and our body figures out that is just innate, this incredible intelligence. But, when our body is dying and figuring and doing all the things that it knows how to do, and all the energies, of course, go down their natural avenues and are ready to leave, it's said that if you hold on to consciousness while you're dying, if you could hold on to it for just that 1 minute when you're dying, when you're actually dying, that it's a great benefit to, future rebirths and the whole process. I don't think it should make us paranoid about it, but a lot of the pain and the distress, first of all, it's animal nature to try to recover, try to make oneself live. That's a part of it. But there's also everything that we feel that we are, the consciousness. It's become so identified with the body because we've channeled it in these avenues and these corridors for so long. It's become so identified with the maze that when the maze starts to crumble, it's very distressing. It's not always distressing, and people die in various forms of distress. But our spirit and our spirit aligned with the soul. Spirit, I think of as life force. The soul is our individuality, and I think our soul is very much connected to consciousness. So is our spirit, but maybe not as much. These are all descriptions that don't have to be completely true, but just the way I understand them. But so identified with the body that it becomes distressing, metaphysically in a way. And I heard Sadhguru say, he said that what people think of as heaven and hell is if you've built up all these negative qualities, the way that you think, the way that you act, you've created various habits of thinking, of placing value on certain levels of like either society, or thinking of humans as better, or thinking yourself as better, or thinking that everything else is just there for you to use, really glorifying the ego. All this ego glorification, and there's various levels of this. It's not just polar or duality, but there's various levels of this. But the more of that you have, the more ego identification, the more body identification that you have, the more hate, anger, or outrage that you have embraced against other people for wronging you, or other people for getting in your way or not giving you what you want. All of that is body identified, ego identified. So it's harder to leave. It's harder to go beyond. It's harder to tear away from that when you die. And that tearing away is what happens. It's what has to happen. You can't live by frustration. And that tearing is like a hell. And time becomes really weird, but it's really hellish when you have to tear away from all this selfishness, if you've cultivated selfishness. And very few people have cultivated enough to really be in a completely hellish experience when you're dying. Even when you don't physically, or your energy, your impressions, your more subtle, the subtler energies that are you, those still exist even if the body is completely destroyed. But it's trying to go beyond the body. And the more ego identified it was, the harder that tearing is, the more painful that tearing is. And that's really what hell is, at least that level of hell. And what heaven is it's loving everything. And if you loved everything and you weren't identified with the body, and you cared about other people, and you weren't ego identified, you weren't identified with, I'm Hunter, I will always be Hunter. Hunter is me. If I'm not identified with that, if I love everything, if I see myself as part of everything, and I truly embrace that in my thinking, my understanding, and the way that I live, once again, there's different levels of this, many. But if I truly don't identify as Hunter and care about everything during life, it's like sinking into light and realizing that you're light, and just allowing the little borders, the little outlines that kind of contained this ethereal thing that we are, allowing those lines to dissipate, and we just submerge. And then that's, the light at the end of the tunnel. That's a heavenly experience. And of course, there's astral heavens, there's other dimensions, but it takes time. And I kind of knew this before, but then I heard it from other spiritual people and spiritual texts. I'm like, oh, maybe my sureness is not off. But it takes time for us to gather up another body, even in the astral realm. It doesn't happen like that. All of the things that we are do that naturally. It's not like you have somebody on an assembly line that's just pressing, making a new body, taking you out of your old one. No, everything that we are just does that as naturally as a river flows back to the ocean and goes the path of least resistance. And the most resistance is when we're identified with all the egoic things that we all kind of know. That creates the most resistance, the most pain. Those hellish and heavenly experiences upon death, at least that part of the process, very much has to do with these subtler impressions that we have embraced. And it does take time to form various bodies to where your consciousness can kind of fully go to an astral realm for a time. And when most people die, they go to the astral realm for a time. And usually an astral birth is somewhere, though time doesn't work the same, it's 500 to 1,000 years. And there's all kinds of astral, planets and parts of the astral realm. It's not either a hellish or a heavenly existence. There's a whole plethora of ways to exist in the astral realm. It's freer. You don't have as much. You can't reproduce physically because you're not material, and you are your ideas, and you are the subtler energies that through lifetime after lifetime that you've cultivated. And sometimes you go this way and that. Sometimes you go more entropy and dark, and sometimes you go more light. And then sometimes, a lot of the time it's just stairs. You're slowly going up, slowly coming back to yourself. But I imagine after this life, after Hunter, so I'm only gonna be Hunter once. Try to make the best of it. Try to help as many people as I can. And certainly I haven't physically hurt a lot of people. I've been in fights, but I've emotionally hurt people. And I feel like those were the times when I was building up the negative subtle energies that would hold me back. But I feel like overall I've done pretty good. And we just got to try. It's not the whole process of life, death, and forming new bodies and new birth. It's not about judgment. It's about empathy and growth. That's what Dharma is. And, as it says in the text, Dharma, at least one text, Dharma is not about justice. It's about empathy and growth. And it's it's so strange because every religion and spiritual path has truth to it, but they're all like blind men grabbing an elephant and describing different parts of this elephant. Whereas consciousness is just sitting back and funneling as the eyes of all these blind men. And we get so attached to us being right about spirituality, about our path, about our version of God being correct. And I mean, they're all right in their own ways. You can use a religion, you can use a spiritual path in a number of ways. You can use even a terrible teaching, quite well. It's all about how you direct things and choosing to direct your consciousness, choosing to use even the walls of something like a religion, the walls of something like societal political ideals or materialistic life, using those walls to channel into not a house of horrors, but a palace of wonders. It's all about how we channel all of this. And the remarkable thing is that we can conceive of a universe and a multiverse that's so vast. Maybe we can't conceive of it and make it real for us, like in the moment, but we're so small, but we can conceive of so much. It's the thing that's remarkable is not that everything is so big, it's that we can conceive of it. That everything that exists externally has an equivalency and is reflected in us. We are a pail of water reflecting everything, but we can reflect it. And the trick is to reflect it well. Our opinion about the world says a lot about us. And there's a lot of bad in the world, but there's also a lot of potential and a lot of good. And how we see the world. And if we feel like we're suffering through it or working with it and in it, that also affects the process. I think that a certainty of self doesn't need to exist for an experience to be wonderful. You don't need to be certain about yourself or what's going to happen. You don't need to believe that everything exists as you wish it to, or as you've been told, or as you want to believe. It's okay if it doesn't. And I think that, when we die, there's a lot of people who call out to their mother. And they're calling out to the Divine Mother. They might not know it because the way that they understand the Divine Mother is through their physical mother. But the Divine Mother is a part of a grander love that your physical mother is a smaller representation of, just like every single person is a smaller representation of the multiverse. And, hopefully your physical mother was good. Even if she wasn't, she might have been the bad side of things. But, and you can always reach out to the Divine Mother, which is the light. And when people are dying and calling out to their mothers, they're calling out to the compassion side of Source, God, whatever you want to call it, of the multiverse, of the universe. They're calling out to that. They're calling out to the compassion to make the transition easier and to help with the fear that being identified with this weird material thing naturally creates when the tearing is happening and we don't know what to do. We're scared. I know that when I was very poisoned at one point in my life, I'm not going to go into detail, but I was very poisoned, so there's a lot of hallucination stuff, but my body thought it was dying. I was very poisoned. Fluids were coming out of every hole. My body was getting rid of everything because it was ready to leave. All my energies were ready to leave. And I know my brain might have dropped a whole bunch of TMT, because we have a cache that drops. And it helps. It touches the pineal gland, which is a transdimensional gland. And, genetic memory opens up and different dimensions open up and it just makes everything happen. There's a chemical equivalency, but it also happens on an energetic equivalency that we haven't measured yet, or at least, not scientifically in the material sciences. But I experienced other people's lives that I think I might have been related to in my past, like an Irish woman who was dying of fever in something like I think it was like a brick hospital,
and it was like around the potato famine, and I don't know how I know all this. I don't really know how I know I was a woman, but I mean, I remember feeling like I remember feeling as a woman, and then feeling how I looked. Like I didn't feel with my hands, but like my consciousness was fitting in a different container, and I remember being her, and I just knew I was her, and I remember dying of fever as I'm facing this brick wall. That's one of the lives I experienced. That's the most clear one. And I just kind of like my consciousness was the same. It felt the same, but it was in a different body that had created different mazes of self-identity to where I just knew who I was. And I was dying. And that has something to do with genetic memory and perhaps past lives. Because, souls go through male and female births, but it also might be genetic just from an ancestor or something like that. But and I'm not going to go into the different lives and stuff. That's the clearest one. But I just knew who I was, and I was her. And the consciousness felt the same, but I was also dying. It's very strange. And the main thing that I want to say about that is that I remember I kept on in my head and with my very being, and even with my words, I kept on thinking, mother, mother, mother. But the strange thing is, since I think about the Divine Mother and I understand Ma Kali and my Divine Mother, it wasn't to my, it was like my physical mother and the Divine Mother were the same thing, and I was calling out to the Divine Mother to not die. But it was very, very, my mind was confused. All this stuff was happening to my body, and my consciousness, but my consciousness was still clear in a way, but I was scared because I didn't know what was happening. But my whole being was calling out to the Divine Mother. And I think that even, people who die in wars who just think of like a fatherly God, they call out mother because they're calling to a part of God and they just don't understand it. So people think they're calling out to their physical mother, but they're calling out to the Divine Mother. And that's what I was doing with my very being. And maybe that's why I survived. I don't know. We can't say how, why we lived or died, but why anybody did. It's not my, I don't have authority to do that or complete understanding. But I will say that I understood to my very being that the Divine Mother could help me, and I was calling out to her as this whole process was happening. At any rate, I think that's enough of me talking about consciousness, as a baby and my youth, and how it progresses, my ideas about that, and what happens at death. I hope this has been interesting. If you like this video at all, like this video, helps traffic to this channel. Feel free to share this video wherever you like. And, feel free to subscribe for more content. I'm always willing to also talk to you. If you want to leave any comments in the comments section, ask any questions, make any statements, as long as you're polite, I'm willing to engage. At any rate, try to figure out how you set up your walls and how you channel your consciousness and try to touch your consciousness. And think about death, but don't be afraid of it. And think about life and love it. And what do you remember as a child? Thank you very much. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day.